Hey everybody, David Chatham here with Angel Oak Creative. Thank you for listening to this latest episode of our Nonprofit State of Mind podcast, where we kind of pick the brains of nonprofit leaders and get some of their insights and advice and experience. And we've had some really great guests to talk about everything from AI to grants to communications and fundraising and all of those broad topics. And this week we have another great guest, no exception there, with Reid Ricciardi. Reid is Executive Director of Talent Management and University Advancement at NC State. Reid, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, David. Thanks for asking me, and happy to be here.
My pleasure. Thank you. This particular episode generated from a post that you had made on LinkedIn, and I thought, that's kind of interesting. So I responded and kind of out of the blue asked you if you might be willing to have a conversation, and you graciously did. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
The power of LinkedIn, and
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
but look forward to talking about talent in the nonprofit sector and what that looks like. But before we get into that, would love to hear a little bit about your journey, kind of how you got to where you are today and why you chose this particular profession that's, in the nonprofit universe.
So you want me to go back to the very beginning? I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Yeah, right,
I'm
exactly.
But cheesehead by birth. No, I won't go back that far.
Yeah. I'm sure you missed the cheese curds, right? That's
right. No, I do actually. I'm a Midwesterner at heart for sure, but been out here now since 2008. Time's flying. It's
yeah.
hard to believe that my journey and advancement started in college, like a lot of people. But at that time, and I think until relatively recently, a lot of us who are in the field would say we sort of fell into it, and that was how it happened for me. I happened to be on a academic track, and as I got closer to the finish line, realized that was probably not going to be the right match for me, and I was struggling to figure out what was next. And I was in a student organization in college, where we interacted with the advancement people a lot, the fundraisers, the leaders of advancement, the university president. And we went to events, fundraising events and alumni engagement events, and they basically used us as student ambassadors. We weren't technically didn't have that title, but they used our group in that way, and pretty effectively, I'd say.
Yeah.
We as students, we'd hold court with alumni and donors, and the alumni and donors would eat that up, right? And anytime you're hanging out with college kids and have a chance to spend time with them. So when I was struggling to figure out what I was going to do, I mentioned this to one of the fundraisers who also happened to be a mentor of mine, and she said, "Well, have you thought about development? You've been to all these events. You see what we do. It seems like you'd be good at this. You got good communication skills and good relationship building skills." And it just so happened I had reached out to my high school. I went to a private boarding school in the Northeast, and was inquiring about a position that they had there on the teaching side, academic side. You didn't have to have a license, and I had a lot of my degree was in government, political science, and history, and it was a government and a history kind of faculty position. And right around that time that I had the conversation with my mentor at Purdue, they posted a development position. And it was a development assistant, and one of these kind of generalist type roles in a small shop. And long story short, I applied, took the job, went out there and worked at the school for the independent school for 2 years, doing a lot of miscellaneous stuff, all advancement related, everything from annual giving to old school stuff in envelopes, checking names off lists, and going to the library to do research on donors and prospects, and managing, my first year there, I managed the reunion weekend,
Yeah.
it's all that kind of stuff.
Putting in the
And
time.
yeah, so that's how I got into it. I parlayed that to another independent school in Indiana called Culver Academies. Worked there for 3 years. Did some major gift work there, but also ran their annual fund for a couple of years. And then that got me closer to Purdue, and then ended up going back to Purdue and working there for nearly 10 years
Wow.
in annual giving, major gifts, also some of the stewardship space as well. And then towards the end of that tenure, was told about a position at Duke at the Fuqua School of Business,
Hmm.
and threw my hat in the ring, and got a call pretty quickly. And it just kind of we got to this place in probably 3 weeks, where it went from never thinking we were leaving Indiana or leaving the Midwest to, are we really moving to North Carolina?
Wow.
But I had a great experience working at Duke, and there again had opportunity to do a variety of roles, from annual giving to major gift to campaign
Yeah.
planning, and became the chief development officer. Had the opportunity to come to NC State, which is frankly mission alignment is was better for me. I went to a land grant institution,
Yeah.
believe in public education, and NC State culturally is very similar to Purdue. So it did the fundraising gig until about a little over 6 years ago now. And when the vice chancellor, Brian Sisko here, called me up one day and said, "Hey, I want to talk to you about talent management."
Oh yeah.
And I stopped by his office on a Friday afternoon, and he, told me about this conference he had just come back from, where a lot of institutions were building out the talent management shops
Yeah.
within advancement. So not, separately in HR, but actually embedded with advancement. And I really, didn't know what talent management meant, to be honest. And so yeah, and basically helped build out the shop. Wrote the job, helped write the job description, and been in that role. And then since that time, we've combined. We are now part of the finance administration and talent management team, which is basically the HR finance functions within advancement. The
Okay.
advancement shop at NC State, if you count everybody now, is pushing 325, 330. And
Yeah.
that's all the colleges, that's all the central
Wow.
units. And so we're a service provider, and we really approach it that way, and believe in that sort of customer service mindset for all that we do, from the recruitment, talent acquisition side, to professional development and training, to all the HR functions and finance, et cetera. So I'm very much in the talent acquisition and professional development space of that office.
Sure. What is it about the advancement world that you enjoy? What is it that kind of keeps you in that place?
Well, I think initially, why I got into it and why my mentor thought I'd be good at it was, I have, like a lot of fundraisers, frontline folks have an ability to connect with people and
Mm.
build genuine relationships. And I enjoy that process. I enjoy doing that. And I've always enjoyed meeting new people and hearing their stories and having those conversations. I've always enjoyed the events, the energy around that. You think about homecomings and reunions, and
Yeah.
or road shows, when you go into different cities and meeting alumni and just connecting and meeting people. That's
Yeah.
that I think at the core of why I got into it, why I've enjoyed it. And of course, it's also building internal relationships and building relationships with your colleagues and getting to know people. And then I think it's the overarching mission alignment everywhere I've worked. I've had the opportunity now to work at all three of my alma maters. So
Oh,
I
neat.
went to a private high school. I worked there. I went to attended Purdue and graduated from there. I worked there for 10 years. Worked at Duke, got my master's there. So I think, when you're working at your alma mater, there's the special connection there, and an
Yeah.
affinity that you have, and wanting to promote it and advocate for it. And in general, I've always been an advocate of education, both, all forms, because I've worked at private schools and public schools.
Yeah.
But I believe in the power of education and the impact it has on people and our society and communities. So I think, especially being at NC State, I credit, or rather, our leadership, and especially Randy Woodson. I think when you have leaders like Randy as the chancellor, he does such a great job of helping you feel valuable, that your role is making a difference. I mean, granted, your role is a small, very
Right.
small sliver of the pie of the impact that NC State has. But I do think there's a genuine sense of the role that we all play and the impact that we have and what we're doing to contribute to NC State's overarching impact in the state, the people in the state of North Carolina. So I think
Yeah.
that you feel that if you work here, and at least I do, and I think a lot of my colleagues do, and so that connection to mission, I think is something that certainly keeps me motivated and drives me, and I think it drives a lot of people, obviously.
Yeah. Well, in the last few years, since COVID, maybe even a little before, but the landscape seems to be shifting a little bit in terms of recruitment and retention of staff, of talent, and that includes development advancement people. What have you
Yeah.
seen over these last few years that's kind of notable in that way? What any trends, any sort of just shifts in the thinking of folks in this world?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll qualify it in that we've been fortunate at NC State. I think we've done historically well within the last 10 years, and definitely within the last 5 or 6 and post-COVID time, have done, I think, a really good job on the recruitment, acquisition, and retention front.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of factors contributing to that. And that's really my world. And I see a relatively small piece of the world, because we
Right.
almost operate like a boutique headhunting outfit within
Right.
advancement in NC State. So it's a fairly narrow one, but I do, obviously, I'm on the board for AFP Triangle and interact with peers in the nonprofit space. I go to conferences, interact with my
Yeah.
peers at institutions. So I think I've got a fairly good sense of things, but also it's not backed up in real hard cold metrics, if you will. But yeah, I think the trends are that we have a lot of early career folks in this field now who have a bit more intentionality around what they're looking for and what their expectations are. And I think that's changed a lot. That's changed generationally. And then couple that with how a lot of us have gone through COVID and post-COVID, and what was acceptable before maybe is not acceptable anymore. And I think people have all been much more reflective about their jobs and the mission alignment or fulfillment and satisfaction, and people probably have less degree of patience, or I'm not going to put up with this as long as maybe
Right.
I would have before COVID, because life's too short, right? So generationally, whereas people of my era, and even I go back 20 years, 30 years, maybe even 10, 15 years, a lot of us fell into this field, and I think that still happens, of course. More often now, when I interact with early career professionals, which is as polite way of saying young professionals,
Right.
they're much more inclined to talk about career growth and what does that look like, and they have some expectations about this profession and this field, and a better understanding of it than I ever did when I got into it. And I think a lot of, more than a lot of people did 20, 30 years ago, even less. So there's that. I think they understand the field a little bit more. They want to have a career in it and grow within it. And what does that look like? And as employers, we need to adapt to that. And they're going to be asking more frequently about about that next step and about
Yeah.
promotions and about salary and all that in a way that I never asked about that. And I don't think I'm unique. I don't want to be too anecdotal about my thoughts on this, but I don't think that's unique. I think a lot of people were, you're the loyal soldier. You're gonna just do the work, and someday somebody's gonna tap you on the shoulder and be like, you'd be a good match for that job. And that's just not the case anymore. And then you factor in how the world has shifted in the last 5 or 6 years. I just think the maybe the tolerance that people had before, being patient, maybe if you're not so fulfilled, well, you ride that out longer. I don't think people are as patient as they used to be, and rightly so. I think, if you're not fulfilled, if you don't, if you have a manager that's not a good manager, or if you're in an
Right.
organization that, if you're not in an organization that has good culture, if it's a toxic place, or whatever the factors are, I think people are less inclined to put up with it, and
Yeah.
they're gonna look for other opportunities in places where they can be more fulfilled. I think compensation is definitely a part of that,
Yeah.
and compensation. That's why I made that post initially on LinkedIn. It was an example of where the salary inflation has not kept up with housing inflation, and
Right.
so and I think the line I use, you can you can save all the lattes at Starbucks. That it doesn't matter how much you save at Starbucks, you're not making up that gap.
Right.
And I think that's something we all have to wrap our brains around. Like the financial pressures people face now are vastly different than 10 years ago and 20 years ago. And housing is a huge factor in that. So I think that's why there's some more movement too, is that people are gonna, if they're successful and if they have the skills, they're gonna find an opportunity that is fulfilling, but is gonna help them achieve their goals, both financial and professional.
The development role, the fundraising role at many organizations, there can be a bit of a revolving door, right? I mean that there's I know I was on the board a while back of AFP, and that was a conversation then, and I've just
Sure.
kind of tracking it. It still seems to be a conversation now. What
Yeah.
you know, what do you think contributes to that? What's the and not looking to blame anybody or to put fault
Right.
anywhere, but
Right.
more so just to understand it, right? Of what do you think contributes to that? Um, that uh, transitory nature of that position.
Yeah, I mean, mostly when they talk about that, it's the frontline
Yeah,
fundraisers, and
right,
there's that common data point that's thrown around about 18 months. That's the average time span, or tenure. Um, I push back on that a little bit because I'm not sure. Well, that is a dated data point,
okay,
and I'm not sure how much science is behind that at the moment, or
sure,
how recent that's been. I know EAB has done some work on that, and I think some others, and it could be spot on, right? In my experience at NC State, like I was sharing with you, our retention's been quite good.
yeah,
We have many folks who have been in their positions well past 18 months. In fact, I mean, I have a lot of colleagues who've been in their same position for 6, 7, 8, 9 years now.
right,
And uh, and and I think it's transitory a little bit more, the more early career, because that's the
mm,
nature of those kind of roles.
right,
Early career roles tend to be transitory. Like, it's a 2-year kind of role, and then the expectation is you're moving on to something else. I think there's even though the marketplace is tightened, there's always opportunities, and it's like a lot of professions where it's portable. If you're good at what you do and you can represent that well, you can really move around on the regular, and probably find opportunities to grow. And and going back to what I was saying before, I think the days of people waiting and waiting for the right opportunity and waiting to be promoted, or
right,
grow in place, if you can't grow in place and the timeline that you think is your timeline, you're going to look around and find something
yeah,
else, and or coupled with the salary piece if you don't feel like you're being compensated with the value that you bring. And right or wrong, I mean, I think some people can make a pretty strong case that those are accurate, and the timing for them, it makes sense, or their
Sure.
motivations. I'm not sure it's great for everybody, because I certainly see a lot of resumes where people are in place for a year here, 2 years there, a year and a half there, year and a half there, and one data point that I know and I feel pretty confident about is some work that EAB did around fundraisers tenures, and when they really hit their stride, when they really peak in terms of their output and their revenue generating as a frontline fundraiser. And their research really basically focuses on that, getting past that 2 year and into the third year interval. That's when you really hit your stride, because then that's when you've got all the plates spinning in the air, spinning at different points in the donor cycle, but you're managing that donor cycle. You've done the prospecting and discovery, you've cultivated relationships, you're having the philanthropic conversations, you're putting proposals forward, and now you've got people at various stages within that cycle, and you're managing that well by going past the second into the third year. That's when you're really getting that traction as a fundraiser. So I don't think that's unique to higher ed. I think that's probably anywhere where it's incumbent that you're maintaining existing relationships, donor relationships, and building new ones, and having to develop a pipeline and cycle that if you're not sticking around for at least a couple, 2-3 years, I don't think that serves you well in the long run to hop around. But I think it's been like that for a while. Even COVID had a little disrupting factor there, and with that shaking things up a little bit. But there's a lot of nonprofits and a lot of opportunities, and I think people are probably a little quicker now to be looking around and thinking about, well, if I'm not getting what I feel like I should be getting here, and that's not always the compensation piece, by the way, or the promotion. It could just be getting good professional development and training and good coaching and variety of other factors. But I don't know if that answers your question. But it's a tough question.
Yeah,
I don't know that anybody's got the real inside track on it.
Well, I know I was having a conversation with an executive director within the last couple of weeks, and they're looking, they're on the hunt for some new development people, some new, early career type people, like the ones you were talking about. And, as we were talking about it and talking about this idea of longevity and all that, kind of what are the expectations for that person in that role, right? And are they expected to come in and within 6 to 12 months double the amount of money that they raised, or to a 50% increase, right? And in talking and being exposed to fundraising professionals through AFP and all, I mean, that expectation seems unrealistic, right? To be able to come in and kind of be able to establish that kind of record that quickly. So, for me, I think that's one of the, kind of, areas of at least discussion anyway, is what is realistic, right? For an advancement person, for a development person to come in. Are they expected to come in and make an impact right away? Should they be given some grace? What's your take on that as a part of that AFP universe?
Well, it partly depends on the role, and I say that by, is it an annual giving role or is it a major gift role?
Sure.
Major gift role tends to be more long-term. Annual giving, a little bit
everybody
more
wants major
transactional.
gifts, Reid. Everybody wants major.
That's exactly right.
And a lot of these folks are playing both roles, right? I mean, that's you're in a 1 or 2 person maybe development team, right? So there is that expectation of both, right?
Yeah, I think it's so dependent on the organization and where they are and what the opportunities are in terms of their their prospects, their constituent base, et cetera. And also like it's also really dependent on the CEO, president, chancellor, whoever, and or deans if it's on the academic side of what their familiarity is around advancement. And oftentimes the unrealistic expectations are set by people that just don't know our profession and don't understand the field and don't understand the marketplace and how fundraising works. And are there times that are a little bit unique with a variety of organizations where you can come in and really move the needle exponentially? Of course, and we could probably come up with all sorts of examples.
Sure.
But for the most part, it's incremental change. It's incremental moving the needle, and growth that sometimes mirrors the general growth of the country, economically speaking, and other times does not. But if you look at the most recent Giving USA report, it doesn't mirror the economic growth, but it's kind of got that trajectory. There's none of these like extremes. So I don't think I do think there's a tendency to have unrealistic expectations because the answer, the budget answer is oftentimes, especially I think with smaller mid-sized nonprofits, the answer is fundraising. And that's the solution to this budget delta that we have, this gap. And so the fundraiser, we hire the right fundraisers. They're going to come in here and make it rain and make the magic happen. And then it just really depends on your constituency and capacity and where the opportunities are. And then do you get lucky? Do you is the timing right? Do you get lucky with some strategic asks or some strategic relationships? I do think there are some fundraisers that are really talented and are really able to do the hard kind of research, discovery, relationship building, connecting the dots, and doing all that in a way that sets them up to have the biggest opportunities. They can do some pretty special things, but they still can't, pull a rabbit out of the hat.
Right.
It doesn't work like that. And in my experience too, and at least in higher ed, timing has a lot to do with it. You could meet 50 donor prospects, and 49 of them now is not right, but there might be that 50th where, boy, I'm so glad you stopped by today. We're actually just working on our financial plan. All fundraisers have been doing this long enough to have those examples of where you just happen to have that conversation at the right time. And you're getting that check in the mail weeks later. That's a little exaggeration, but College of Textiles that was named at NC State, that was a very that was driven a lot by timing and where that family was with their financial planning timing. And they, that went from an entry starting conversation, discovery conversation, if you will, or qualifying conversation, to the family making that gift to name the college. That was in a 12-month period. Actually, it was less than 12 months.
Yeah.
That's amazing. But it was fortunate timing, and of course, I think NC State, the folks that were involved, get a lot of credit because they managed that process really well.
Right.
They managed that relationship really well, and did all the right things all the way up to leadership. But anyway, kind of a unique example. Those things do happen, not the norm.
Yeah. Well, we've had these screenings of Uncharitable here, that's based on the Dan Pallotta TED Talk from a few years ago, and this idea of trust-based philanthropy and the idea of funding overhead. And I was thinking about it, and a lot of, at least my perception is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of a lot of the advancement that happens within a higher education framework actually is going to fund overhead, right? Because you're funding seats, you're funding you're funding fellowships. So it's an interesting thing, because why is it that people can see the value of it in that circumstance. I mean, I believe,
Yeah,
if I understand correctly, you all recently just came off a $1 billion, campaign, right? And $2 billion. I'm sorry, I cut that in half. A $2 billion campaign, and a lot of that, it wasn't necessarily about building a lot of new buildings. I mean, there's some of that, but it was also like just
sure.
funding, university, funding education, right?
Mhm.
What do you think? What is that? Why do people see the value in that? I mean, obviously education has an intrinsic value, right? But so does helping people overcome hunger, or to learn
Right.
ways to deal with trauma, or to get out of
Yeah.
a situation where they're experiencing homelessness. So I
Yeah.
was just thinking about that kind of, conflicting almost approach. What's
Yeah.
your take on that?
Yeah. I think I thought that was an interesting movie. I'm not sure I align with the main premise or points of the. I mean, a couple of things that, for instance, stick out. Like the 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 presenter was extrapolating from a personal experience and that person's connection with some other large charities. Those charities are not the normal charity. I mean,
Right.
if you look across the nonprofit landscape, those are a small percent, a relative small
Charity
percentage, right?
water, right? I
Eh,
mean, huge.
yeah,
That's
I
right.
I just don't. I agree with some of the points that they make about the trust-based philanthropy example, and there is a focus on overhead and costs, and of course, because it's budget related. Are you managing your budget, and what do you and salaries,
Yeah.
benefits? Those are a huge chunk of any organization's operating budget, so it makes sense that that's always part of the conversation. Um, and I mean, why some nonprofits can't pay more, pay their staff more and hire better talent. Well, some of that's just pure. That's their budget. They
Yeah.
can't do it. It's not that they don't want to. And I think a lot of I think a lot of boards understand that. I don't think there's as much pressure from most nonprofit boards that are uh, similar to what is described in that movie. I,
Yeah.
I think they're talking about boards that are made up of Fortune 500
Yeah.
CEOs that are on those boards and political leaders, and I think that's a really different dynamic.
Yeah. But
I'm not saying it's wrong, but
what about the viewpoint of the funders, though, themselves, of trying to maintain this idea of 15% overhead, or, and I even just saw recently
yeah,
a kind of a giving circle organization actually has it in their kind of their stipulations of the use of the funds, that no more than
yeah,
10% can go to administering the program, right? Which means
right,
it
right,
can't go to a salary, it can't go to any of those.
yeah,
So that
yeah,
that to me is, I agree with you. I think on that, on your first observation, not that it matters that I agree with you, but I do agree with you on
yeah,
that.
sure, yeah,
But that particular part of it, where the funders are, and that individual and
hmm,
institutional funders, right? I
yeah,
think sometimes hold that standard, and I don't know, is it right? Is it wrong? Is it,
yeah,
really good? Being good stewardship
yeah,
is always a positive, right? But what does
absolutely,
stewardship look like if you're restricted
yeah,
so greatly that your hands are tied to, you may get $1
yeah,
million to facilitate a program, but if you need three people to run it and you only have $75,000 you can put towards
yeah,
salaries, it's almost
yeah.
impossible to succeed, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so many variables in that. I mean, I think transparency is always really important.
Yeah.
The ROI is really and impact is
Yep.
what you're what you're doing, what any organization's doing, or they're focused on their their expertise, their subject, what their mission, and what kind of impact and ROI is going to be represented through philanthropy. And so to the degree that you can make the case that you are hitting those goals, hitting those metrics, that you're making a difference, moving the needle, having an impact, um, what those percentages are, I think it's just so different from
Right.
organization to organization. And some organizations do require more overhead. I mean, those percentages are going to be larger, and that's why that premise of the movie. I mean, I think it's important. I mean, all organizations have to evaluate this. All organizations need to make sure they're being good stewards of philanthropic dollars and being attentive to their boards, et cetera. But I think it looks different for a lot of across the sector,
Yeah.
depending where you are. And also, I think there's also this notion of philanthropy and philanthropists. There are a lot of people, whether you're the $100 donor or the $100 million donor, there are a lot of people who are just not philanthropists. They just that's not part of their identity, or it's not part of something they care about. They don't believe in it, whatever it is. And so I think as long as organizations uh, are being attentive to their donors, making that strong case, and the people that want to be a part of that and want to be a part of that mission, and you can have those conversations, and obviously those conversations are different for the
Yeah.
$100 donor versus the $100 million donor, or 10 million
Sure.
or $1 million donor, because you're able to make that case in a more personal way. And in my experience, I mean, I've worked at 6 institutions, had a variety of roles. That issue has come up very rarely.
Yeah.
But also, I think that's a gap in that movie, is that you probably noticed there's not a lot of education represented in that
Right.
movie.
Right.
There's no higher ed. There's no higher ed represented in that movie
Right.
that I recall.
No.
So
No.
ours is a different universe,
Yeah.
and I don't think all of that really applies too well. But I know that in higher ed, there is a commitment to being transparent and sharing that. And in health, you work at a public institution,
Yeah.
it's all out there. Somebody can look up my salary and look up anybody else's salary,
Yeah.
and people have all sorts of opinions when you're looking up salaries.
Well, well, let's shift gears a little bit. We've talked a little bit about the
Sure.
recruiting, retention, all of those. What,
Yeah.
as you're looking at talent going into the next, 5 years or so, what are the skills that are the most valuable for development people? What are the things that people who might be interested in advancement now, what are the things that they should be looking at of making sure that they're gaining the experience or the education or whatever to be prepared for this next 5 or so years in the field?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, partly depends on the level of the role and where people are
Sure.
at. I mean, I say that because, like, at NC State, we're hiring frontline fundraisers at their early career entry level, would be like a leadership giving officer. So they're
Yeah.
going to be doing a lot of smiling and dialing, right? A lot of discovery work, and they're trying to get people elevated to that $1,000 to $10,000 annual giving.
Yeah.
So that's a different skill set in some ways than the person that you're hiring to be the principal gift director of philanthropy, of principal giving, or sorry, of estate giving, of planned giving rather,
Sure.
or if you're going to be on the CFR front or major gifts. But all that said, I mean, I think the things that apply today have always applied. You've got to have the drive to do it, that you can be an independent operator, that you can manage that process, and getting that donor cycle, getting that portfolio and pipeline to a degree that you are consistently able to hit goals, and that you can hit those metrics in terms of the submissions for proposals, and that you're getting enough of those funded, and doing all that. And I think that that applies whether you're in leadership giving or if you're a director of philanthropy.
Yeah.
But having that drive, having that ability to manage your time, and to the level that you need it to, is really important. The relationship building skills, the core communication skills, both verbal and writing, although with AI, the writing part, you can cheat a little bit.
Yeah.
That's pretty helpful. But you've got to be able to build relationships. You've got to be. I always look for, and this is my term, neutrality.
Yeah.
You have to be. We talk about being the being a chameleon, right? Social chameleon, being able to adapt to your situation. So I think that's always applied, and that still applies. But in that space, you also have to be neutral. And I think the biggest compliment is if a donor doesn't, for example, know what your political persuasion is as a fundraiser. I think that's the highest compliment. Like if
Right.
somebody really doesn't know where you are and you've been able to navigate that in a very genuine way, but you're still being neutral, right?
Yeah.
Because oftentimes we're dealing with a lot of different people, and you have to be in that space where you're building that relationship. People have trust in you, and yet you're a neutral party. You're seen as a
Which may be a
philanthropic
little
advisor.
tougher now with the divisiveness of our society, right?
Oh yeah,
Being able to
100%.
kind of hold your tongue, maybe, or to
Yeah,
withhold making
yeah,
that point is probably, yeah,
yeah,
that's definitely
yeah,
a skill,
yeah. Well,
and some
it's that
discipline.
you're making friends, you're building friendships, relationships.
Yeah,
And how much do you share, and where do you draw those lines, and how do you do that in a seamless way
that's
where it feels
interesting.
natural, where it feels natural to the prospect or the donor, what have you. So I think all those skills are still very much the core of a really good fundraiser. I think having a degree of a competitive spirit, competitive with yourself, competitive
Yeah,
with others, been in a been in a team kind of way, right? Like, if you're on an athletic team, you're competitive with yourself, you're competitive on the team, but you're supportive at the same time. Your
right.
success is somebody else's success, and vice versa.
Yeah,
So I think you have to think that way, because collaboration is just so critical to being successful. Um, and the last part, which is I will admit the part I always struggled with, is being able to separate yourself, not take things too personally,
yeah,
and being able to, it's the Ted Lasso, be like a goldfish. You gotta have the kind of memory where you can quickly forget things, quickly forget that no, or the person that hung up on you or whatever, and just move on, and not dwell on it. And I think if you can do that, you can be pretty successful. Because as you know, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of, you chase leads that go nowhere, or you just get people that never call you back, or get ugly, or just say no, or rejection, and you just got to stay at it, and rinse and repeat.
well, that's interesting. So be Switzerland and be a goldfish. Those are your two.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Those
can't
are
I
your
can't wait to see what I'll hear all sorts of stuff from my colleagues about that comment.
That's good. I like that. Well, good. Well, we need to wrap up, Bree. We could keep talking. I love these
Sure. Yeah,
conversations. Thank
absolutely.
you so much. Any last advice you would like to leave nonprofit leaders? Most of our audience are development people, executive directors, that sort of, those sorts of folks. Anything you'd like to leave with them?
Yeah, sure. I'd say there's never been a more important time to be an active coach and mentor of your people,
Yeah,
as a manager, as a leader, regardless of how senior you are. The days of being a distant leader, or an unengaged manager or supervisor, if you want to retain your people, you've got to be engaged. You've got to be actively coaching and mentoring, and being seen as a supportive coach, as a supportive mentor, that you're invested in people's career and their growth, and you're invested in them being part of the community, and providing, facilitating that sense of belonging in the organization. You have to be doing all of those things if you want to retain your people, because that's, I think, way more important now than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. I think that's what, certainly anybody under the age of 30, that's what they're really interested in. And I think it applies for all of us. I mean, we all
yeah,
want to have a leader, a manager, who's somebody we see as a coach, somebody who's there for us in terms of our career growth, professional growth, or whatever that looks like.
That's great advice. I appreciate that. If people want to, maybe they want to come work with you at NC State, and how can they find out more about the work you all are doing there?
Yeah, well, first of all, we have a website dedicated to all the careers and advancement, NC State's UA advancement careers. It's pretty easy to look up and Googling that. I'm on LinkedIn, Reid Ricciardi, and I'm always happy to connect with people online there. And I think we're relatively engaged in the community. We go to conferences. We try to be around, and I got to put a quick plug in for AFP Triangle, because I think we've got a great organization and we represent a lot of nonprofits in the area. And there's a great jobs board there if you're looking for roles. And we have lots of engagement opportunities, whether that's social or professional development too. So it's a great way to get plugged into the community here in Raleigh or in the Triangle.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for all you do for our state, our region. It's such an important role to educate our citizens. So thank you for that. And, for just setting the bar high too, for the advancement profession. So we're so grateful for that. Thank you to everyone who listened today. Grateful for that. Would love to have you listen to more episodes. If you want more information about Angel Oak, it's angeloakcreative.com. Certainly we're also on LinkedIn and all the other social shouldn't say all the other social platforms. We're on Facebook and LinkedIn. So grateful for that. And anybody has any other ideas of other great guests, they can reach out to me, David at angeloakcreative.com. Would love to hear that. So Reid, thank you so much for your time, and wish you all the best.
Thanks, David. Thanks for including me. It's been a great conversation. Have a good one.
Take care now.